Hi, it's Gwyn and welcome back to the channel. I hope you're all doing well. Has there ever been a day in rock history that has had a lineup to compare with Tears for Fears, Status Quo, Cliff Richard and the Shadows, bear with me, Robert Plant and Jimmy Page, Genesis, Phil Collins, Eric Clapton, Dire Straits, Elton John, Paul McCartney and Pink Floyd? And yet this was the fantastic lineup that was on the bill for the 1990 Silver Clef Award winners concert held at Knebworth House, just outside Stevenage in Hertfordshire in England on the 30th of June 1990. With such a stellar lineup, I'm amazed that this concert hasn't been discussed more over the years. And I thought, let's have a look into this concert and see just exactly how good it was. And also Paul McCartney's place on the bill. How good was Paul on the day? Knebworth House was the venue, and it had hosted regular concerts since 1974, when the Allman Brothers played before 60,000 people. Since that time, there's been legendary lineups that have featured at Knebworth, including The Stones, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, Genesis, The Beach Boys, Deep Purple, Queen and Oasis, just to name a few. But our focus here is on the events of the 30th of June 1990. I have to confess that I was very, very lucky in that I was at the show, and it has been recorded for prosperity and included on a CD reissue and on DVD. The CD, which I have here, features all of the artists, but only a very, very small selection of songs that were performed on the day. So we're going to have a look at the concert as a whole, see what the full sets list were, and also which of those songs on the set list actually feature on the CD. The day itself, I remember very distinctly, was bookended by quite heavy rain and high winds. But in between, there was some glorious sunshine and some glorious music too. Some of the poor weather obviously wasn't a deterrent for the nearly 120,000 people who attended the event. So let's dive in and see who was on the bill, what the songs they played, and just how good were they. Tears for Fears opened the show during the opening rain shower. At this point, Tears for Fears were really a very hot property on the music scene and were currently touring their massive third album, The Seeds of Love. And also ringing in most people's ear was still Everybody Wants to Rule the World, considered to be pretty much an 80s anthem. It was this track and another Bad Man song from the Seeds of Love album, which featured on the Knebworth CD. Their set comprised of songs from their first three albums, the fantastic debut LP, The Hurting, songs from The Big Chair and The Seeds of Love. Considering they were the most contemporary band on the bill that day and were in very high company, Tears for Fears held their own and kicked off the day fantastically. Perennial festival and chart artists in the UK, Status Quo, belted through a very familiar set list of hits with their driving blues pop rock formula, and they were obviously bedecked in their customary pale blue denim uniforms. They knew their strengths and they played to them, engaging with the audience in a way that the more, so we say, earnest and polished Tears for Fears couldn't yet manage. Status Quo were fantastic on the day, especially the opening song Caroline and Whatever You Want. I defy anyone not to love a bit of Quo. Next up, and I've got to say slightly at odds with the rest of the billing, were Cliff Richard and the Shadows, who then took the stage. Even then they were considered as something of a relic from a generation before, and Cliff, who is aged 49, and actually only a year and a bit older than Paul McCartney, he pranced around the stage in a bright pink suit and delivered a 13-song set that on inspection looked pretty dated. and yet pulled on the deep layering of nostalgia for pretty much everybody who was there, with the oh so familiar tunes that were too catchy to ignore. You cannot deny Move It, On the Beach and Do You Wanna Dance as crowd pleasers. Cliff and the Shads did a bloody solid job. The audience was then entertained by Robert Plant, who returned to the place of one of Zeppelin's most triumphant performances in 1979, which was the last to feature John Bonham. Plant mixed in some solo numbers with a select few Led Zeppelin numbers too, and for the last two, Wearing and Tearing and Rock and Roll, he was joined by Jimmy Page, and together they put on a much more polished and coherent performance than they did in Philadelphia 4 years previously at the Live Aid concert, considered by pretty much everybody to be the worst Led Zeppelin performance ever. Here, Page and Plant righted a few wrongs and brought rock back to the proceedings. Next to take to the stage was the person who Jimmy Page held responsible for Led Zeppelin's disastrous Live Aid performance, none other than Phil Collins. No festival during this era was complete without a Phil Collins contribution. Collins, in 1990, was simply huge. His current album, But Seriously, released in 1989, held the #1 spot for 15 weeks in the UK, and he had 4 solo albums and some mega hit singles in his armoury. In the 1980s, Collins could do no wrong, and yet his legacy from about this point on is mystifyingly tarnished. I don't get it. For me, his contributions either solo with Genesis or as many other writing, performing or production credits with other artists have been incredible. On this day, he didn't disappoint the audience, particularly In the Air Tonight and its epic drum fill, splitting the Knebworth air like a hammer. This was top draw Collins. Ever the crowd pleaser, he played a short set of hits and also played an amazing drum duet with Genesis tub thumper Chester Thompson. A banging set. Collins was joined on stage by his Genesis compatriots. The next biggest thing to Phil Collins in the 80s was Genesis. I'm a big Genesis fan and would love them to have contributed some more authentic Genesis songs from their repertoire, but understand in a mixed artist environment they decided to play crowd pleasers, particularly the closing medley. For me, this didn't represent Genesis in a true light. They could have played Home by the Sea, for example, and left the lighter pop stuff for Phil Collins' mini-set which preceded it. Nevertheless, this was a really good set, with the closing medley cramming in so many classic tunes there literally had to be something for everyone. Genesis would return to Knebworth just 2 years later as part of their We Can't Dance tour, with all the bells and whistles of a proper Genesis show. The next section of the show saw stacked contributions from the big hitters Eric Clapton, Dire Straits and Elton John, culminating in a collaborated effort on the Cream classic Sunshine of Your Love. Each of these artists at the time were really considered as rock royalty, and it is perhaps surprising that they split their set amongst them, really only contributing a handful of songs each. However, it might have been slightly curtailed though, as by this point in the day there was an obvious overrun of the schedule, and the audience, myself included, was beginning to wonder just how they were going to fit in the remaining artists on the day by the close of play. Clapton, resplendent in a pink pastel suit, performed some of his 80s tunes, with Old Love being a standout. The Clapton band, who provided the spine of the assembled musicians, were really quite accomplished, and Dire Straits supplemented the assembled crew and performed their 3 numbers, finishing on another 80s anthem, Money for Nothing. Elton John performed his previous year's hit Sacrifice, a bit of a plodder in my view, but he thankfully redeemed himself by closing his set with Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting. This section of the concert was closed by the assembled combo joining Eric Clapton for an epic version of the Cream's classic Sunshine of Your Love, running to over 12 minutes in length and featured a drum solo by Steve Ferroni and a percussion solo by the magnificent Ray Cooper, who loves to get the crowd going. Quite a supergroup and a highlight of the day, yet there was more to come. Next to take the stage was the apparent headliner, Paul McCartney, though not last on the bill, as it was, I believe, arranged that Pink Floyd would close so that their light and laser show would benefit most from the nighttime conditions. For Paul, this show fell towards the end of his 102-date Get Back World Tour, and just a couple of days after his famous Liverpool Docks concert. All performers on the day had been awarded the Silver Clef Award. Paul was awarded his for his services to the music industries 2 years prior, in 1988, by George Martin. Paul's band at the time consisted of Linda on keyboards, Hamish Stewart on guitar and bass, Robbie McIntosh on guitar, Paul Wickens on keyboards, and Chris Whitton on drums. So Paul kicked off with Coming Up as a pretty jaunty opener and really got off to a rocking tone, playing next up a superb version of Back in the USSR, and then follow that with I Saw Her Standing There. The 1989-1990 World Tour saw Paul incorporate far more Beatle numbers than on previous Wings tours, and this was evident on this smaller selection of songs for this evening. The next song Paul played was We Got Married from Flowers in the Dirt, which is, I've got to say, a particular favourite of mine and would have been really enhanced had David Gilmour taken to the stage a little earlier than scheduled and replicated his solo from the recorded LP version. Sadly, it was not to be. Paul then, as is customary, I guess, led a short audience participation section before a further couple of Beatles tunes followed in Birthday and Let It Be. The version of Birthday from this show would be the featured version to appear on Tripping the Live Fantastic and as a single released in this year. Next up was the Wings juggernaut of Live and Let Die, which was then blasting through the very heavy evening air. Paul then included his jokey rendition of If I Were Not Upon the Stage, which was a staple of the Get Back tour. Before embarking upon the next number, Paul acknowledged the great work of the Nordoff Robbins charity, who help disadvantaged kids through music therapy, and a cause that Paul has supported for many, many years. Paul then played a colossal version of Hey Jude, which was to feature along with Coming Up as his contributions to the CD release. Paul graduated toward the end of his set with his John Lennon tribute medley of Strawberry Fields Forever, Help and Give Peace a Chance, and next played a stirring rendition of Yesterday and leaving the stage on an uptempo version of Can't Buy Me Love. So my recollection of Paul and his performance on the day was that it was an amazing set and seemed to be really appreciated by everybody who was there. Hey Jude in particular, in front of 120,000 people, was absolutely a standout moment, as was the John Lennon medley, which, got to say, tugged on the heartstrings, and that was very special too. To finish up the day, Pink Floyd took to the stage and played in pretty heavy rain and gusty winds, it's got to be said. The really poor weather conditions meant that the laser show and also the circular video screen which accompanies Pink Floyd concerts was not able to be operated at full extent. In fact, it probably would have taken off in the wind. Despite this, they played a really compact and powerful set, culminating in Comfortably Numb and Run Like Hell. Both of these tracks feature on the CD. Another highlight of Pink Floyd was the performance of The Great Gig in the Sky from The Dark Side of the Moon, and had Claire Torrey reproducing her vocals on stage for the first time in many years. Pink Floyd were amazing. The combination of Richard Wright's delicate yet precise keyboard play, the solid and uncompromising foundation set by Nick Mason on drums, and the purely majestic guitar playing of David Gilmour cemented their position as show closers. Comfortably Numb has been etched in my memory from this day, a truly sublime song, and the climactic solo holding its own against the elements. Another thing I remember from the day was ending up being absolutely soaked and trudging back to the car, hoping to get back onto the road and get home as quickly as possible. But it wasn't to be. We spent hours and hours bogged down, nudging our way through to the exit. I mean, it wasn't really until the very early hours of the morning that we even got onto the nearest of roads. Eventually we managed it and crawled away into the night. All in all, this has to be one of the most prestigious lineups that's ever taken to the stage on a single day. All of these artists were pretty much considered to be legends 36 years ago, so just goes to show you in what high regard they're all considered now. It really is difficult to imagine that such a concert could take place today. Later in the year of 1990, we would see the CD and video releases of this event, though the double CD would only contain a fraction of the music performed on the day. Paul's contributions of both Coming Up and Hey Jude are worth it alone, and copies are reasonably easy to get hold of, and it's a solid listening experience. I really consider myself very, very lucky to have been there and seen such fantastic musicianship, some great songs, great artists, all rolled up into a fantastic day. For me, the level of musicianship in particular eclipsed other similar events such as the Prince's Trust concert, the Human Rights Now concert, Live Aid, and also the Freddie Mercury tribute concert. All fantastic, but the level of musicianship and the quality and selection of songs was absolutely superb at this event. So were you there, or have you got the album, or the CD, or the DVD? Are you familiar with this concert at all? I'd love to know what you think, so please put your feedback and memories down in the comments below. So thank you very much for journeying back in time with me. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, then please give it a like. Consider subscribing if you will, and I look forward to seeing you all next time. Until then, it's bye for now.